My name's Hamish Robertson and I run the Watch Collectors Club based in London. But tonight we're down in Canterbury with Justin Richardson, and we're here to talk about handmade watch cases. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Justin Richardson. We're here in my gallery and workshop in the heart of Canterbury. I'm a goldsmith, bespoke goldsmith and jeweller, and I have been making made one-off gold watch cases for approximately 10 years now.
And there's very few people in the world who hand make watch cases, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But you started off as a jeweller, so what was it that led you to think about making a watch case?
Well, a watch to me and to a lot of people these days is more a piece of jewellery than anything else. And really I approach it, it's a piece of goldsmithing, or what they used to call small working.
All right.
So you're making a box basically, or a case, much like any other piece of jewellery, but you have to house a movement which has to be held securely and accurately. So it's much the same as any jewellery, only the tolerances are very fine indeed.
Okay.
But it's something, the aesthetic to me is everything. So it's creating a very beautiful timepiece that happens to have an extra bonus of telling the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's more about the look of the piece rather than necessarily the movement, although I like to use fine quality movements, mainly Swiss.
Yeah. And you make the dials and hands as well?
We make the dials, I don't make the hands.
Okay.
But I make the dials, the case, the crowns, the buckles, the pushers if necessary. I can make deployment catches. I've made all sorts of whatever part needs to be done and needs to be made in gold or platinum, then I can do that bit. I just need an engine to be supplied to fit in my cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a lot of really interesting designs that you've developed over the years, and not just round cases. In fact, most of your cases are not round, is that right?
Yeah, I like different shape cases. One of my first ranges I developed was the octagon, which is a very pleasing form. It's slightly perverse form in some ways because it doesn't really translate to a 12-digit dial in some ways. But also, a lot of it was influenced from a lot of the early cars, sort of 20s, 30s, 40s cars, sports cars, a bit like MGs. They would often have their speedometers and clocks, which are octagons. So a lot of the sort of heyday of British motoring, they had some very interesting metalwork. So drawing influences from that, drawing also influences from Art Deco period. My rectangular watches, the tank range, a lot of those influences are heavily from the sort of 1920s sort of deco feel to the watch. But you're not recreating an old idea, you're translating it, updating it, and making a modern kind of equivalent.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I can see the influence in the watches, but I see them as very much of your design and pretty timeless actually. And they're exceptionally, you use a very high polish finish as well, don't you?
Yes, yeah, I'm not a big fan of kind of satin finishes. I don't think things like precious metal watches, they need to show off the features of a gold or a platinum case, and one of those is a high polish. We often set the crowns or the pushers with diamonds and sapphires, so you're using sort of precious materials to highlight it. And it's about showing off. It's a dress watch. It's something to go out in the evening when you're putting a cufflinks on, a really lovely dress watch. And it's showing off partly what the goldsmith can create, but also what is a very sort of timeless piece of jewellery.
Yeah, absolutely. And they really are stunning pieces in the metal. Can you talk a bit about the case construction then? How you think about what has to go into the design, and then the different parts, and And what are the challenges involved?
Well, a lot of the work really goes in creating the original CAD file.
Right.
So what we're doing is 3D printing in wax from the CAD file,
okay.
and then casting those waxes into precious metals, rather than the traditional method where you're creating a mould from a metal master. This does two things. One is to make it far more accurate, so that you can create quite complex geometrical shapes that have to kind of fit together perfectly, but also you don't get so much movement and distortion when you're casting.
Right.
Because you're cutting out one of the vital processes in the lost wax casting technique. The other kind of challenge is creating a really good casting. And that's fundamental to be able to get a high finish on the metalwork. If you're creating a casting that's too thick, or has too much difference in the thicknesses of metals within the case, you get a kind of speed up and slow down of the metal within the mould, and it starts to create distortion or porosity or marks that you can't then polish out and fix. So you have an optimum thickness. So the ideal is to create the case has an absolute consistent thickness throughout all the pieces. So the metal then moves at the same rate throughout the whole mould, therefore creating the best possible metal, which then can be finished to a high standard.
But to me, wax is a soft substance. So how do you get the sharp, extremely precise angles that you need inside the case?
So the waxes are 3D built from the computer file, which means they can be absolutely accurate. Okay. The wax is then put into a plaster mould. Then the plaster mould is put into a kiln, which bakes it, and obviously the wax then disappears from that mould, and then the molten metal can be injected into that mould to replace where the wax was. And really, so it's creating the right mould to start with, and if you can get that bit right, then the rest is relatively straightforward. So the hard bit is really in those very early stages. So when we finish creating the two halves of the watch case, when we get them from the cast, they fit together even at that stage, with very, very little kind of adjustment or cleaning up or anything. They're that accurate, and that's fundamental. If anything goes wrong at that stage, any distortion, any bad finish on any of the metal, then they don't go together. You then got to try and overwork the case, and that's when you start to spoil the hard, crisp forms. And the rest of it really is in old-fashioned goldsmithing techniques of filing and finishing precious metal, and going through the stages.
That's impressive, because these are not easy steps.
No.
This is why around the world case making is an industrial process.
And platinum is by far the hardest, because it can distort because it's so much hotter melting point than gold, but also to get a crisp finish in platinum, you have to go through many, many, many stages of dressing down through very fine polishing papers and various sort of finishes, and hand polishing with felt sticks and all sorts of things to keep those flats and the crispness to the case. Gold is relatively straightforward, as you can almost polish it from a file, but you certainly can't do that with platinum.
Okay, and I guess finally, what other ideas might you have in your watch line? What are you excited to try next?
I want to try using certainly some different, more exciting movements, maybe with a tourbillon or other chronographs, which you've made, which are always quite interesting to make. But also kind of develop different shapes and different forms, but still to keep them kind of dressy, and something something should be opulent, and it's for showing off with. To have a case that nobody else has, that is entirely unique to the wearer in every way, both in design and format.
Absolutely. So if you're interested, then check out the website and the social media. Thanks very much for having us. It's been great to see these watches up close.
Thank you.